All right, so checking out Bree Foltz, the mother's more. I want to thank Black Rose for sending me not just all that information, all those videos, but then making a playlist, which I did bookmark. I think I even have it open on another tab right now on the machine, out taking my little constitutional. Gotten weak. Gotten so weak. Haven't been doing it. Getting to bed so late. It's just like, oh, I don't want to get up and go walking. I'm gonna have to. I'm gonna have to find the fortitude and the strength. Gotta stay a warrior. Powerful warrior. Full of honor and strength. If any of you ever see the voice actor, video game streamer Tyrannicon, Ty, I think it's Ranicon. He also goes by the name Throthgar, and it's just, I can't do it justice because he used to do these really long, very, very, very organized, like where he would go through all this animation. He would mod the fuck out of a game. He'd have all these goofy characters in there, and then he would have them like interact, and he would do voices for them all, and it was just hilarious, some of the comedy of it and everything. Now he will mostly stick to raging on Dark Souls, but knowing him, he's probably got something in the works that he doesn't seem to be a man who stays bored. But he would do these, I'm a warrior, and he would just have these ways that he would just do these voice affectations. He's from he's from the north, up north, and so simple as, and there's even things he'll say that, I mean, you're just like, you are such a northern Briton. I mean, it's just so funny, like, yeah. Just as you kind of get this sense of the different peoples of Britain and where they're from and how their kind of demeanor is and stuff. So the thing that Robert Briffault was getting into this time, and I was really blown away. He really has been putting together a lot to stress. Like he has a part of the early part of the book, he stresses incestuous relationships and consanguineous relationships, and how almost everywhere in the world, because most people would never be outside of a circle of about 200 people, simply because of the likelihood that they would encounter more than that number of people, and really encounter them in any way safely, that they would be able to encounter people outside of a sphere of about 200 people, and that those people would not think of them as an opposing group, and do something horrible to them, which was super normal. He really gets into, like, it's just simply normal, up until almost the last, like, 100, 200 years, that you just savage somebody who's not from who's obviously of a different group, just traveling through. That there would be rules to deal with travelers, but that there's all these exceptions to your neighbors. Your neighbors can be savaged in quite a number of reasons, some of which is in being in proximity to you. Which does then really, there's a lot about the savage as he gets into it, and everything that plagues our society, such as gangs, the territorial nature of gangs, and what seems to be their random violence, the sexual revolution and sort of the collapse of sexual norms of America, which now I'm starting to really have to evaluate, that it's like, no. What needs to be understood is that with the spread of education from the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants of Puritan descent in New England, also descended the norms what we think of as the norms of sex, like how people should behave. Like, you shouldn't be looking at grown men should not look at women of a certain age and younger in a sexual way. It is improper. This kind of thing. That's why when women, there's this kind of idea of like women travel and the men they're yelling and whistling and oh, I love you, blah blah blah, and all this stuff. And it's because in those cultures, just as we understand on the far right, there's this thing of understanding the passage of time and thinking about like, what will this mean 20 years from now? That is a bred for trait. This is why you'll find people, middle-class black people who have been middle class for generations and have almost no members of their family who are like gangsters and hoes, that they're churchy black people, and that carries on, like it carries on real strong. It's because of the bred for trait. And this has had been bred into everyone. This is why we have stories into living media memory, cinematic memory of the idea of sort of these wild-eyed, like the wild-eyed rednecks of Appalachia, just doing whatever they feel like, or that there's somewhere out there these wild-eyed white people who are just living day to day. They're just going out from the trailer and drinking and having more babies, and that this must be focused on, because many white people would see these people. They'd be more likely to see them. Where there's high concentrations of black Americans will self-isolate and self-segregate into the black areas of town, not having ever encountered large swaths of white America. I don't think a lot of black Americans have really encountered white liberals of the stripe that say I'm around, that are like sort of the origin of the Green New Deal. They're the origin of a lot of the most wokest concepts and policies that, they're the origin of it. Like, this area is where some of these ideas have even been ginned up. There's a reason Portland is doing what it's doing, and people are standing by and being cowardly punks watching it all, because they're people who are okay with these kind of quasi-insane sort of, really, it's a religious fervor. It's the leftover of a type of religious fervor. And also a big part of it too is that these are people who abide by extremely strict sexual mores. Right? Thinking about it, you're thinking about it and you're like, oh yes, because their sexual rules are innumerable, because every woman gets offended if you actually behave toward her like she is a pretty woman. And so many of the liberals of the Northwest are really ugly. So there are these ugly, mutated people, then a handful, so many of relatively good-looking people, but there's innumerable rules about how you are to behave toward other people in regard to sexual desire. Briefold gets into, this is a unique problem of the Western civilized world. This idea that we need all of these customs and rules to deal with the most important driving force within the human. And he gets into, this is why, because the savage does not conceive of the future the same way as we do, not having to depend upon years of outcomes to keep the civilized world going. When you have to keep a city functioning, cities, roads, and all that functioning, you have to think decades ahead of time. We praise and remember people who thought decades ahead of time. 48 Laws of Power is full of names of people who thought decades ahead of time. They thought they were calculating for years and years and years what to do. So we now have this problem of people returning, and really what it is I mean, Edward Dutton might say, what we just have is fundamentally the wrong pressures. And because we have the wrong pressures, our natural savage is coming out. People are just becoming naturally savage. They don't have an existential threat that makes them have a very elaborate set of rituals and rules by which you can then have a sort of mating. So, people are just spitting out crotch fruit all over the place now. And it's becoming more and more normal, as some of these videos that I was looking at were saying, that you have polyamorous and polygamous, fundamentally kind of relationships where this woman will have children from 2 or 3 men, and all these men at some point have to interact with one another. And they're all basically standing around kind of, saying or doing or trying to do this, that, or the other for their baby mama. And so it's this woman who she's having her vagina worshipped. And so he then Berthold got into then the nature of marriage in regards to like who then would get married. And that marriage is economic. Like, he's really building up this big argument about the economics of it. And I think I've gotten to where it's pretty much he's kind of summed it up and is moving on to a next step. But that he was getting into how you rarely found old women, like you would find that old men would put off marriage as long as they could. They were trying to basically sex it up until their 30s because that's what people did. They just lived and they boned each other down, and then at some point it looks like the whole reason why you even married a woman is because she could cook clean and make sandwiches and darn your boot things, your moccasins or whatever. She could fix your moccasins. And without skills like that, you were stuck. Like, so the idea of a beautiful woman with big breasts and a perky butt who's real pretty and very thin, those women would lose. They would lose in the marriage game in the savage world. Savages want fundamentally a labor worker. So they will pick women who look like, who are just like literally kind of almost horrifying to men. And so this is why you then get these feminists who, again, we're fucking up the context. So since I was a child, there was sort of this cute argument that would happen where somebody would get into like how, but in wild Africa, they like their women larger. And I'm just kind of like, so, I didn't fuck, man. I'm like, what? Well, whatever. And it was like, what hit me is we got this wrong again. We got the context all wrong. Because you married a big woman because she was physically more capable of doing things. She'd actually also been trained, very likely, to know how to darn the moccasins, and so we're not taking into account, like, she was prepared to be a fat girl. This was a bred for trait, to be a big lazy fat chick who would just kind of roll around the house, barely dealing with the offspring. Another savage thing that savages do. The village raises the child, but they scarcely raise them. One of the things that was another consistent issue that he brings up is that, there's just no such thing as disciplining children. There's a specific point at which you become typically an adult, usually through some rite. But there was just simply nothing like what we have, where we discipline your grammar, we discipline your your posture, that you're constantly being improved upon in your behaviors. That's a civilized trait. It's starting to really show, like, no, civilized society is this very unique thing, and it is a gem. It is obviously a gem. It's obviously a jewel that all the savage people of the world want to steal, and they're being allowed to. They're being allowed to come in and just kind of behave as if they belong to a society that they probably are not going to adapt to terribly well over the next generation. And I, and that's just my personal viewpoint. They unless what they do is become sort of hyper civilized. This is something I've noticed among, like, you'll find it among sometimes like Latinos who move here. You kind of see it among it kind of makes sense among different Asian families, but then it's sort of like, or is that just very normal? And I'm just seeing it in the sense of Americana, of adopting as many of the institutional norms as possible in some way, so that the structure for the next generation is the institutions of the new country, and that they're really putting it constantly in the context of the mother culture. This is our way, we do this, but they do this here. And that was something I grew up with, especially among immigrant Catholics, that there was some kids who were a hyper institutional, hyper new tradition type of person, because they liked it. They liked the structure and the order of it. To some degree, probably some of you noticed, I have a tendency of liking sort of a structure and order to things. That I'm not as freewheeling as maybe I always had thought I'd been. That's why I don't think I ever fit in with the left, because I liked knowing that I had my Kempo practice. These were the kata. These are this. That is this. This is called this. I like applying names to phenomena. So Briffault really has nailed this thing of that marriage is economic. And then he extends beyond this, goes even further. Then he gets into romance. And that he's like, so romance is another thing that, and this is something I am extrapolating from HBD's chick's writings on French manorialism. So I'm thinking a lot of what we think of as romance and romantic love in the European sense had to develop during manorial periods, and only makes a lot of sense for anybody but like sort of low nobles or something, that without it being something from the French manor and British manor and Dutch manor period, it simply wouldn't have like lasted. It wouldn't have had a lasting effect on this society, part of society that was affected, because the French manorial system awarded a wife and land, or basically land, to a family. This makes, therefore, the idea that, one, you can move up classes, two, that there's an economic importance. You need a woman who could labor, but also importantly was the man marrying into the family that would do a lot of this labor, or was the woman marrying into a family that, like, they could recruit a cousin or little brother or other family members to help. So this would mean that possibly whoever this son is being awarded land because he has a wife now, had past ancestors who had garnered some kind of favor by properly running their piece of land, and that this has nothing to do with literally lords. You're getting the land from those lords, from the what was it, Luflaua, I think that means, really, that actually it meant bread giver, That's what Lord comes from. Allower or a louder or something like that. And they're actually a person who gives out bread is where the term comes from. That was one of those things. Somebody had been watching something fascinating, clipped a piece of it, said, hey, you should see this. The whole thing's kind of interesting. But, you know, here's something you were talking about. And I was like looking at it and I'm like, the blood feast. And then at some point something came up about where do we get the word Lord from? And it said, no, the word Lord comes from this totally unrelated word that means giver, as in the bread giver. So it's these people during the late Roman Empire who would distribute the bread, and they were the landlords, fundamentally, being these Northern European jarls, or the descendants of the European gods. So the French manor system, this would have been a lower level. This would have been them handing out parcels to people that then hand out parcels. So you have this system of men earning fundamentally a good life for their family, and that the wife is very busy also doing the same thing. And in many ways, one could think about this. So she has to take care of something that's going to benefit her family, but doesn't really belong to her. She's still garnering favor, really, that it's with her husband, but she's even more garnering a type of favor. She will be known as that wife who helped make that happen. And so people will then know about her. They'll know about her children. That will spread, and then her children are more likely, when they're seeking out a marriage, to then have land distributed to them. To me, I'm starting to think, without women seeing this order of who hands other people wealth, that they just can't really conceive, very much like the savage not seeing the future, they can't conceive of this idea that wealth is actually built by just simple human toil and market exchange. They can't quite, many do, but this is not all. And not all in a very large number, as we see from who will vote for the welfare state and vote for the handout state. And that it's just being a savage. That's all it is. It's just being a savage at the ballot box. More and more, almost everything that the right doesn't like is turning out, when I read Revolt, to just be the normal behavior of savage humans. And that the vote doesn't necessarily civilize us. What actually civilizes us is really what's kind of hitting me. What probably really civilizes people is the threat to civilization being something that we can absolutely see and feel at our neck, so that people will behave and act within order. Now, you see, that's the thing, is I'm somebody who I have my own issues, so I like order, and I'm somebody who probably is bred to survive in an order, and that chaos, while entertaining, is something I really am not well built for. So that's I have to think about it in those terms. This is like, why do you like the concept of order so much? So these were just some thoughts I was having after reading some Robert Briffault. Going to be commenting more on this, because I gotta get my walkies in, gotta get my readies in. And then, you see, I allow myself a luxurious coffee. You see, if I do my reading, I get my coffees. So, but yeah, one of the most interesting parts about this reading in particular today, was that whole thing of the savage and the corpulent, was that you get this love of corpulent women that is unique to the total and complete savage, no matter where they live. That was actually a big thing that he made a point of is that he's like, this is not unique to this area or this region or these people. He's like, no, all people before the advent of monogamous marriage and this idea of lifelong partnership always value these rather, like, I mean, almost grotesquely corpulent women. And he's like, because literally there, and that beauty simply is not, there's not a beauty standard. It's just not there. It doesn't matter, because that's not what marriage is about. That's what youth is about. That's what being young and having sex when you're young is about in those types of societies. And he's like, marriage becomes then it's just simply a thing that exists because of economics as people get older. And he was like, and that's it. It's not anything more than that, really. It's the Western civilized society has dressed it up as more than that. And we think of it in our terms, seeing that we have so many people have come out of that structure with good outcomes. And but that this is also, and that the ones that could be argued that it's almost superior outcomes. And so to a great extent, what Aaron Clary has said is very, very true. And the Book of Numbers really nails it. What a lot of people have said, where it's like, this isn't worth, the numbers say it's not worth it. And it's like, no, that actually makes sense. This idea that within about 200 years, the species has adapted to pull that off. That kind of very structured, very disciplined sexual relationship that fundamentally never existed before. That's it's damn near an impossibility. And so it makes a lot of sense that we see what we see once the bounds are taken off of people, that we see, oh yeah, people won't stay married. No. The minute a woman gets to run off and get picked up by the last loser in line, she'll do so. And so yeah, just something I was thinking about. But and that's quite natural. It's quite normal. It makes sense when we think of the context, the historical context, and all that. And I'm like, okay, no. This now I see why Briefolt's law is so, that it. Yeah, now I see why Robert Briefolt is Robert Briefolt. So, all right, later.